Hello, I'm Jonathan from Your Why. Thanks for joining us today. We have an exciting topic that we're going to have an opportunity to delve into. And as we do, I encourage you, if you would like, to use the chat as an opportunity to comment or ask questions while we're moving along in our conversation. But today, we have an opportunity to talk about designing a meaningful life. So I know going to school prepares you for a lot of different things, but does it really teach you how to put together a life that really matters? Is a meaningful life something that falls in your lap? I would have hoped so, but that wasn't the case. Or is it for someone more special than you? Is it even possible for an ordinary person? That's an interesting intro to our topic and conversation about designing a meaningful life. I am very fortunate that we have Scott Schimmel, who is the president and chief guide of the U School. The U School is an organization that believes every student deserves the opportunity to construct a meaningful life for themselves. Scott's a speaker, writer, curriculum designer, consultant, has spent 20 years studying human flourishing in young adults. And as I was thinking about our conversation today, I think what a gift it is, truly, to explore what a meaningful life can be at such an early age and at other points in time in life. But what an incredible gift. So, Scott, wonderful to have you first off. And thanks for coming on to discuss designing a meaningful life. First off, if you would, what was the impetus for the U School? And what is the U School for those that may not be aware?
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, not to be so self-centered and talk about me, but the impetus of U School in many ways was my own journey, my own struggle of trying to figure out not just what to do, but how to be in the world. And I think probably looking back, I was always the kid that was asking the bigger questions, always wrestling with who am I? What am I doing here? What is this all for? But I early on kind of opted out of that. At 13 years old, just announced to my parents, I'm going to go into finance when I get older. And if you came from my family, that was like victory. That was like me if I was a father of a blacksmith. And one day I say, hey, I'm going to be an apprentice of a blacksmith. And everyone's like, okay, good. It just made a lot of sense. And it also resolved a lot of things. Because if you're going to go into finance and you're a teenager, nobody worries about you. No one pressures you. You've got a good head in your shoulders. There's nothing to really figure out. And there's a really clear path about how to go out and into the world. And yet underneath that was always a sense for me, not that doesn't matter, but is that me? Is that the thing for me? And I don't think I'm unique in this desire for wanting to do something extraordinary. Maybe I'm the first millennial. Maybe I'm the first person to say, I don't want to just get a job. I want to do something that matters. But the question for me was always, how do you figure that out? How do you really figure that whole thing out? Do you really just get lucky? I think all the advice I got early on was essentially don't think about it. Just put your head down, go to a good college, then get a good job, and you'll figure that stuff out later. And almost like a wink behind that is most of us never really figure that out anyways. We just kind of make it work, and we're responsible. I think that's probably the version of life that I heard. Being great in this life means you're responsible. You take care of yourself. You take care of your family. You take care of your lawn. You don't leave a mess. And if you got something extra, to share it. And I don't think that's a bad way to live, but there's just something more. So that's a bit of my personal journey. And I'd honestly say I was pretty selfish in not wanting to start out in life on a path that would lead me to those kinds of quiet desperation moments down the road when I was 40 or 50. Like, what am I doing here? How did I get here? How do I get unstuck? I think I wanted to make sure from the get-go, which is really what drives U School. What if there was a way out of the gates to get clear about these really important things in life so that you can make a series of choices just much more informed?
I appreciate the way you laid out kind of the chronology of your journey. I could see at 13 declaring something like that. There's cheers in the house. Okay,
Yep.
we have Scott on board with the program.
Yep.
But it sounds like underneath that, there's just kind of that yearning, that burning. And if you pursue that, you're kind of short circuiting your development. And for a lot of people, those questions may not come to the forefront, as you said, until later on in life.
Yeah.
So how did you decide to bring this to young students and share a little bit about what that process is?
Yeah. So out of college, I decided to not go into finance, to go into nonprofit work, which was, I think, pretty confounding, probably to my family, particularly to go into work where I'd have to fundraise for my job. And that's so opposite from going to work at a big accounting firm. But I did it and worked with college students, mostly at University of San Diego and San Diego State and some other schools in town. And I did it pretty well for the most part of a decade. And towards the end, the last couple of years, I had worked with, at that point, hundreds, if not thousands, of college students, offering them mentoring, leadership development, taking them on service projects, teaching them about faith, like these really big, important things. And they were also getting great degrees from these top schools. So if there was anybody that was going to go off into the world and do well, it would have been those students. But I had this kind of concern or worry or fear in the back of my mind that maybe the work that I'd been doing wasn't lasting inside them in the same way that I'd hoped. So I tracked down 400 of them.
Wow.
8.5 years into this work, 400 alumni from these top schools who were off in the world. And I wanted to have lunch, coffee. And the questions I was asking them is, how are you? How's life? What are you doing? And I was hoping to get a big sense of hope, like it's working. It might take a couple of years. That's a big transition, but by the time they're 28 or 30, these students that we invested in when they were in college are now off impacting the world. And instead, what I got was really 397 out of 400 of the same story, which was pretty disheartening to me. Wake up call. The story sounded like this: how are you doing? I'm okay. I'm actually not doing that great. Tell me more. Well, I'm a little bit lonely. I haven't really had a close group of friends since college. It's been many years now. I'm kind of lost and I don't like what I do for a living and I'm not sure what to do next. And if that had been, I don't know, 10%, that would have been concerning, but it was basically 100%. And I took a big step back and wanted to think through what then is missing, because these students are going down the track. They're doing everything right, and even more, doing more than you would say is right. And yet they're still wondering and they're still wandering 5 to 10 years after this big thing called education. So what is that? What is missing? And I think from my own journey, I had the opportunity during college, really reflecting on my parents going through divorce and watching the things that they were trying to wrestle with 25 years down the road. I think I had this kind of quarter life crisis at that point. And I looked at these students that were now 28, 30 years old, and they were still lost. And I think there's something missing. There's something about questions, the right questions at the right time, that seems to be the gap. And right when I was pondering that, I met a couple other guys who've been working in corporate consulting, innovation design consulting, that were older than me. And they had noticed the same thing, but even further downstream, working with corporate executives. And their point of view and perspective was, there's a lot of people that are very successful from a career standpoint, but as they got to know them, there was a lot missing. Really hearing the same thing I was hearing at 28, they were hearing at 48 or 58. But at that point, the stakes were even higher. And the idea of intervening in someone's life at 30 or 40 or 50 is a very noble thing. But if we could do something more strategic, it would be much younger, before you started making all those decisions. And really what I've learned is that teenagers particularly are in this very ripe developmental time where those questions become live for the first time. And they don't necessarily know that those are the questions, but they're there. And if they were guided to understand what those questions were and given the opportunity to try to answer them, there's a lot more that would come in terms of clarity and self-awareness.
What I really appreciate about what you're sharing is that, I reflect as a parent myself and raising our kids, and a lot of my peers at the time, I think there was a lot of pressure on our children to perform, to take the right classes, to
Yeah.
AP and do all the extracurricular. And it would almost provided this roadmap that they needed to follow. And so it didn't really allow for their own reflection, their own journey. It was, you have to strive to this, pursue this. Because to your point, Scott, I mean, the teenage years are really about getting in touch with what your identity is. And that's the resolution of that developmental stage. And so it's almost like we didn't necessarily support that, even though we're guiding them and successful parents because they're going to a good school. But it really ignored their process in some ways.
There's a thought that resonates, I'd say, mostly with college students. It's what you just shared. Essentially, to ask them to come up with how many years they've been in school at that point, and how many classes they've taken, how many lectures they've sat through, how many times they've been tested. And then to ask, and let's compare that to how much guidance you've been given to understand yourself and understand life. And that's part of the irony, I think, that we're trying to resolve, is that you can be very successful in school and still miss it. And on the flip side, there's students that struggle in school. There's a lot of academic challenge, and they receive a version of intervention that might kind of, I don't know, solve some surface level questions, but doesn't necessarily get to the root of what some students are really struggling with. And I'm not talking about learning issues, learning challenges, or disabilities. I'm talking about students who early on, out of a sense of hopelessness or not really finding anything that clicks in terms of their identity, just kind of opting out very early on. And I look at that, both sides of that, the students who are doing really well and students who aren't, and just try to reflect on what does it really mean to be an at-risk student? like what's at risk towards what? What is the goal?
Yeah, excellent point. So how do we design a meaningful life and do that from an early stage?
Well, just as you asked that, it sounds absurd for me to have an answer to that question, but I do have some thoughts.
And I appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah, how silly. Our perspective has been that there are three key pillars to building and designing a meaningful life, and this is reflective both from our personal experience, but also the world's biggest traditions, research. So identity, purpose, and belonging, three big things. And those aren't necessarily novel concepts, but I think it's an unpacking of those three things. So having a well-formed identity, having a clear purpose, having close relationships of belonging, it would be hard to imagine a life that someone would say is meaningful, and then maybe some people around them would also agree, if you were missing one of those three. And certainly if you did, I don't know who I am, I don't know why I'm here, I don't know how to build relationships, I think we'd all, yeah, okay, that would be probably the basis of struggle or mental distress at the very least. But so I can be clear about who I am and what I believe in, but if I don't know why I'm here, I don't have a sense of a problem to solve or something to contribute, I would think that person would feel hopeless. And I think if you had really functional relationships, but didn't really have anything to get up for, any meaningful thing to contribute to, I think and then probably the worst would be, I know who I am, I know what matters to me, I know why I'm here, but I don't have anyone to share life with, that loneliness. So looking at those three big foundations as big pillars, as how do we build that? Those then don't seem to be concepts that you can just, quote unquote, teach in the traditional sense. I think we can try, and especially when kids are younger, we ought to. We want to tell you what's most important. We want to share with you from our tradition, our culture, our family, our perspective. This is what matters most. Or to tell young people, especially elementary age kids, this is what we see you to be good at. We want to tell you why you're here. We want to tell you what you have to give. Um, uh, Send them on play dates. Like, we want to give you relationships. Like, that's very appropriate. But the teenage years, that all, in so many ways becomes undone, and they have to figure that out for themselves. So how do we do that? I don't think you can come to clarity about those three big pillars unless you do it on your own. And then what you need, though, is someone to guide you to really think about those questions. So it's knowing what the right questions are, and then someone guiding you with the time and the space and a process to come up with answers.
And it's interesting as you speak to that, because I was hearing you start with, you can't teach that, because teaching is more, it's a passive, okay, this is what you do, versus what you're sharing is you're posing this question, you're allowing someone to struggle with it so that they come to their truth, so to speak. And that guide is there really to kind of just foster that experience and hold that space, that context for them to get to that themselves. And you create that supportive space for there to be struggle, for them to reveal that themselves.
And that's, I think, where it becomes tricky or messy or potentially dangerous. I especially in my 20s and 30s was kind of brought up through a tight faith formation communities. I was a leader of Christian communities and church leaders. And the very notion, I guess, when we come in from youth school to say, for teenagers, teaching them from an external voice these things won't be effective. Then I think you follow the dotted line there, and then what it sounds like we're saying is, so we're not going to teach them anything. Instead, we're going to allow them to discover it. And that's, I think there's some absurdity to that. And I don't mean to discredit the maturity of teenagers, but they're teenagers, and their brains haven't been fully formed yet. Their life experience is very limited. So I think that's a both and. There is, and this is where I think the process comes in. It doesn't seem to work well just to have teenagers together to wrestle with these questions. I believe that's where adults have to be involved. And in school settings or in like Y programs, there are adults who are there who have the opportunity to live life out loud with students. And the best research I've seen is every teenager needs to not only see multiple adults, but have a relationship with multiple adults. And we know, and as a parent, I have now 2 teenagers. Teenagers pull away from their parents, and it's part of the process. They need to figure it out for themselves. And so then most often teenagers are left alone. And they have this little underground world with other teenagers, or maybe now it's social media informed. But I think this is the big opportunity, is for the adults who are involved with kids to share out loud the ways in which they're responding to these big questions themselves, and then turning around and essentially asking the question, so what do you think? What do you think for you? And then it's less messy that way. There's some context. There's a mirror, there's a reflection to look off of. And that actually is what teenagers need. They need to have multiple mirrors to look at, to see what resonates, to see what fits, to see what doesn't. And in that context, what I've seen is, even in highly formed faith or religious communities, when there's a little pressure off that they might get the wrong answers, and they're given an opportunity to answer, that in the context of relationship, the mirror that they get back is one of faith and hope and love and compassion and kindness, and students start choosing into that. But I also have seen students who reject. It's almost a direct correlation to these big ideas that are pushed on them.
It's what comes to mind is how important it is for that modeling, that mentoring of that adult figure, someone who has traveled a little bit further than that student or that teenager. Because as teenagers, we all were so looking to fit in. And so you kind of look at what someone's wearing, what's the right thing to wear, what's the right thing to say, the right way to be. And there's that group think. And so what you're really challenging is kind of separating out that and providing that compassion, that acceptance for all, and to help bring that through to be expressed, which isn't an easy thing, I would think, as a teenager.
Right. It's not easy for a teenager at all. And I think, to underscore your point, it seems like, and I can remember this, maybe you can too, the biggest question that's live and dangerous, we're talking about middle school, early high school, is the question like, am I okay? Because the threat of rejection is so high and reasonable. You very likely will experience rejection on a daily basis, from as small as someone rolling their eyes or not wanting to sit by you, to very directly, that's a stupid shirt. Why did you wear that? And we've heard it and we've experienced it. So am I okay? That question can become the most important question to a teenager, unless they're given other questions to deal with and to reflect on, and almost to park that to the side for a few moments, and to watch, as I've had the opportunity to now so many times, teenagers come together and actually start talking about these more thoughtful questions together, and to listen to one another. And I know I've learned about myself as I've listened to other people think about themselves. And so to have this, almost, I've said this many times, the upside down world of middle school and high school, where we're actually talking about these things together, and guided by it always has to go first from the adult. I don't think it's going to happen unless the adult goes first, shares first, asks the questions first, creates the time first, but then to create space for students to hear one another. And my favorite moments of working with kids for the last 20 years are the moments when a student reveals something, and to watch the effect of other students, to see the super cool, popular kid talk about the anxiety that they feel, and to almost watch other kids who aren't on the social ladder up there almost be like, what? And I'm watching real time them experience the implication of, if that kid is also worried. I mean, that's the stuff I didn't find out until 20-year high school reunion. I didn't know. I wish I had known at the time. So to see that all happen in real time, again, I hope that they're academically strong. I hope that they're curious about learning. I hope they're able to solve problems. But let's equally balance that with, and they're also able to answer questions like, tell me what's most important to you and why. And tell me how you're going to resolve conflict with a friend when you get into it. Tell me what's a problem that you feel like particularly interested in helping to solve. What do you have to give? Like, to answer those questions, I think it's it's almost so common sense. It's too close. And that's what we're trying to do in schools and in partnership with you all.
So Scott, I would even go a little further and say, to have the answers to those questions is like a toolbox for life. And if you have those tools, knowing those things about yourself, the rest of the things kind of fall into place in terms of, being good in school or not. Maybe you're meant to pursue a trade, but having those answers provides a certain armor, a certain security for knowing who you are, and therefore how best to mediate your life. And what I think is so critical is that this is done in the teenage years, because my belief is that's the most vulnerable time of life, from teenage to young adult. And if they come through young adult, they're launched for a little bit. And what I would ask, is some of these questions, I wonder if they're static or dynamic, meaning you answer these questions as a teenager. What about when you're in young adult? What about, when you're, finding a partner, career, etc.?
That's such a good point. I absolutely think they're dynamic, live, open, and it seems like the moments, the times of transition are where they become live again. So thinking about finding a job, finding a mate, like uh, deciding what you're going to study or major in college, if you're in college, those kinds of unsettling seasons where you recognize there's an inflection moment. I think what traditionally happens, what typically happens, again, is to kind of shut down those big questions, because that can lead to anxiety, and anxiety won't help you be clear. Instead, just focus on, pick something, or create a resume, or go and make a dating profile. Like that's so come to almost low down. Like, and instead, I agree. These questions are dynamic. They need, like, bring them back up again. Take a step back, 30,000 foot view. What's most important to you? I can remember hearing a young guy. He was a junior in high school, and we're walking through all these questions for weeks and weeks. And towards the end, I just said, I'm just curious, what are sort of insight are you getting about yourself? And it's a very high achieving academic school, high pressure parents, successful parents. And these were all kids that were involved in ASB leadership program. And this young boy said, I've realized that what I want most in life is to be a dad. And then I'm like, oh, well, I wasn't really understanding the important aspect of that for him. And he said, and I'm realizing all this pressure to find like this really huge, successful career might actually be at odds with me being the dad that I want to be. And I'm going to put that first, and then figure out that other part next. And I just thought the flip of that, to imagine all the folks from my parents' generation and the generation I'm entering into now, the decade I'm entering into now, of folks that put career first and then realize later on the stuff that really matters. So I love those kinds of moments. And yet that kid's going to have 10 more times. If he's not aware, I think the voices will be, put that later. Don't worry about that. Make sure you can provide for the family. And he'll forget or lose sight of what's most important to him.
What a powerful reveal for that individual. And truly, probably obviously validating for them in terms of their outlook on life and the choices they make moving forward. Scott, our time went quickly today. How would one know more about the youth school and resources that you have to offer? And it sounds like you were speaking to that your work applies not just to teenagers in school, but other transitions in life.
Yeah, we work with military transition, folks in corporate transition. My favorite, the part that I lead, is with students in schools. And if you want, I think the next step for folks, easy, go to our website, theyouthschool.com, and there's free stuff to get there. And once you get free stuff, we'll start sending you a series of really kind of thought-provoking articles and questions that you can ask in your own life, or if you're a parent, you can ask your kids. If you're a teacher, you can ask inside your classroom. But I think more than anything, it's to do the work yourself. So on our website, we have a couple free mini courses. It could take you 15 minutes or an hour, or you can spend a month going deep on these questions. There's a couple of them that will help you start on the work yourself. And if there's anything, especially if you're an adult listening and there's kids in your life, or you're coming up to a transition yourself, like I think many of us collectively are coming, this is a transition. What's life going to be like real post pandemic? All this stuff's being reshuffled. I would say do some of this work. Let us guide you a little bit through asking you to reflect on these questions, and grab a couple friends and sit down with these questions, or a cup of coffee, and talk about them and share your thoughts, listen to theirs, and just allow that process to percolate a little bit and see what it does for you. And recognize, though, the warning is it takes brain calories to do this kind of work. It might feel threatening. It might feel stressful. It might bring up more anxiety than it brings clarity at first. But our warning is trust the process. The process works. No matter what transition you're in, no matter who you are, if you lean into it, reflect on these questions, have conversations, you can find clarity. And that clarity will help you make way better choices.
Scott, I appreciate that you've come full circle in our conversation, at least for today. Our topic was designing a meaningful life, and you just gave us action items to enact that. So I really appreciate that. I know we're going to put a slide up so people can have access to reach out to U School. But Scott, I'm just grateful that you're doing this work with students and those that are in transition. Important work and really profound work. So thank you very much. Thanks for sharing with us today. And
Yeah.
for all those that are with us until our next time, please be well. Scott, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Bye.